Come hear of the Lynnfield Patriots who marched off to monotony to fight the British. Oh yay, oh yay.
Eternal glory, may his star shine, and Christ receive thy soul. This one night, every night and all, fire and sleet and candlelight, and Christ receive thy soul. Lie, valiant townsmen, in the peaceful shades we trust, every night and all, immortal honors mingle with thy dust, and Christ receive thy soul. What though thy body struggled in its gore, every night and all, so did thy Saviour's body long before, and Christ receive thy soul. As he raised his own by power divine, every night and all, so the same power shall also quicken thine, and in eternal glory may his star shine, and Christ receive thy soul. Christ receive thy soul. Good evening and welcome to the Lynnfield Historical Society's original production, Shadows of 1775. I'm Ron Sarro, President of the Lynnfield Historical Society. On behalf of all our volunteers and myself, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Your support means so much to us. Tonight, you will be seeing a one-act play written by the brother and sister team Diane and Alan Foulds. Diane and Alan have used heavily researched facts and actual quotes from those participating in the evening's events and weave them into a narrative that I think you'll enjoy. It tells the story of the brave militiamen of Lynnfield who gathered here exactly 250 years ago tonight, this very night, and marched off to face the British Army in the opening battle of the American Revolution. Before I go, I'd like to play one more song for you. It's a song that the British were said to have played when surrendering their army to Washington's army in Yorktown, ending the last battle of the American Revolution. In the song, the old woman, Goody Bull, is Mother England, and the daughter is the American colonies. The farmer who tries to make the peace between them is former British Prime Minister William Pitt, or Pitt the Elder. He, along with Edmund Burke, spoke and wrote very eloquently in the years leading up to the war in order to avoid it. The song is called "The World Turned Upside Down." Goody Bull and her daughter together fell out, both squabbled and wrangled and made a great row. But the cause of the quarrel remains to be told. Then lend both your ears and the tale I'll unfold. Derry down, down, hey derry down. Then lend both your ears and the tale I'll unfold. The old lady, it seems, took a freak in her head that her daughter, a grown woman, might earn her own bread. pride. Some applauding her scheme, she was ready to dance, but we're often too sanguine in what we advance. Derry down, down, hey derry down, we're often too sanguine in what we advance. For mark the event thus for fortune we're cross, nor should people reckon without their good host. The daughter was sulky and wouldn't come to, and pray what in this case could the old woman do? Derry down, down, hey derry down, and pray what in this case could the old woman do? Zounds neighbour, quote Pitt, what the devil's the matter? A man cannot rest in his home for your clatter. Alas, says the daughter, this dainty fine work, the old woman grows harder, so said Edmund Burke. Derry down, down, hey derry down, the old woman grows harder, so said Edmund Burke. She danced as the farmer, and to her he goes, first rose in her ears, then tweaks her old nose. Hey goody, what ails you, wake woman, I say, I'm come to make peace in this desperate fray. Derry down, down, hey derry down, I'm come to make peace in this desperate fray. Alas, cries the old woman, must I comply? I'd rather submit that the hussy should die. Pooh, prithee, be quiet, be friends and agree. You must surely be right if you're guided by me. Derry down, down, hey derry down, you must surely be right if you're guided by me.
Lynnfield, or Lynn End as it was called in 1775, went to war against the world's most powerful army. In the years leading up to that confrontation, they saw their rights as British subjects erode, so they took action. At town meeting, they voted to ban the use of any tea that was taxed. After all, they had no say in that tax, and that was the problem. They voted to stand with Boston when its port was closed by the Crown following the Tea Party. They formed a militia company in case they needed to protect their rights more forcefully. Some of its members joined with Lynn's Minute Company, that smaller, younger, faster group that was prepared to march at a minute's notice if necessary. They participated in the Essex County Resolves, resulting in pleas to the Crown for fairer treatment of the colonists. In short, Lynn End, as with all of Massachusetts, was hopeful for a peaceful resolution, but they were also preparing for the worst. Many of the residents who took part in that first day of the revolution are buried no more than 150 yards from here, just across the common in the old burial ground. Tonight, though, exactly 250 years since that fateful night, they've returned. They've come to tell us their stories of that day when America truly began. Let's meet them. Daniel Mansfield was the town meeting moderator. Town meeting is where the voice of the people is heard. It's where, in many ways, the revolution was conceived. Deacon Mansfield, I have a question for you. At a town meeting today, we take all sorts of legislative action. We might adopt a capital plan, or vote to build a new school, debate library changes, or maybe add a bylaw or two. Pretty standard stuff, and I'm sure that you did that as well. But obviously, something else was going on at your town meetings. Tell us about that.
Well, first, let me explain. I was Lynn's town moderator at the time, indeed. Lynn End did not separate and become Lynnfield until 7 years later, July 3rd, 1782 to be exact. But I did eventually run town meetings here, right across the street at the meeting house. Back before the revolution started, though, the people of Lynn saw fit to put their meetings in the hands of a Lynn Ender, me. The revolution may have started on April 18th, but it had its roots long before that, in town meetings here and all over New England. In 1768, September 16th, if I remember right, town meeting voted to send a representative to a convention at Faneuil Hall to take measures to ask the Crown and Parliament to assure that we, here in the colonies, can enjoy our constitutional rights under our charter. We sent Ebenezer Burrow, the man. On March 5th, 1770, the very day that troops fired upon our citizens in Boston in massacre, town meeting voted that the stores of ammunition be moved from Lynn Meeting House to some safe place. Jump ahead 2 months. With the tax on tea, we voted to endeavor to discontinue the purchase of foreign tea. Local elected leaders would lose their positions if they did not obey. Business owners would answer to the selectmen if they continued to sell it. On December 16th, 1773, again on an auspicious day, our town meeting took action. We voted to protest the landing of the tea. We resolved that we highly disapprove of imposing a duty on it. We did not yet know what was happening in Boston at the very same time. The Sons of Liberty were dumping tea into Boston Harbor. Huzzah!
Now, doubling the tea was quite a rebellious act. I'm sure that galvanized people on both sides of the issue. Also, I understand that the radicals in Boston were doing that sort of thing, and there were also tea burnings in Lexington and Marshfield. Did we ever do anything like that here?
Oh, of course. That incident, the so-called Tea Party, changed everything. We even had a local tea party here, as the women of the town went to James Bowler's bake shop and demanded he stop selling the vile stuff. When he said no, they stormed the shop, stripped the shelves of the tea, and dumped it into the street. Huzzah!
Be careful getting the women angry.
Indeed. After the Boston Port Bill, though, the closing of Boston Harbor, we reacted again. On June 18th, 1774, another meeting was held to demand the restoration of our rights. This time, we sent Captain Bancroft.
Yep.
In August, our language became more pointed. We voted that illegal acts of Parliament did not have to be obeyed. The exact wording of the motion said, "The acts of Parliament were not entitled to disobedience." We were inching closer and closer to the edge. Then, after Massachusetts created a provincial congress in October 1774, we voted to create our own militia company. The stage was set, the fuse only had to be lit. As I said at the beginning, town meeting is where this movement grew. Discount it at your own peril.
So, we formed a militia company. Nathaniel Bancroft was captain. Joseph Gowing was first lieutenant. Captain Bancroft, let's start with you.
The North Parish Militia was formed in 1774. Joseph Gowing himself was selected as captain of this new company. Years earlier, I had had interest in military and town affairs, and on February 6, 1767, I was commissioned captain of the military company of foot of Lynn in the Regiment Militia of Essex County. Years later, in the fall of 1774, I joined up with the company and became a lieutenant. Gowing saw fit later to give me back my old rank as captain, and he stood as first lieutenant. Our company numbered 38 men, despite the fact our small village only had about 25 homes.
You hear?
Joseph Gowing, you were the lieutenant. You were also Bancroft's neighbor, and you ran the local tavern. Tell us, what was your role in the militia? In fact, what was your role in the village?
As the captain just told you, I was originally named captain of the North Parish Militia, but I gave way to his prior experience shortly after that. I ran a tavern across from what is now Parsons Avenue. That was the heart and soul of the village, and the obvious place for the militia to gather when the time came. On the morning of April 19th, we gathered at the tavern before marching to the meeting house to retrieve the ammunition stored there. My wife and daughter clung to me, begging me not to go. You see, my wife and I lost a son and a daughter in infancy and another son at the age of 7. It broke my heart to leave them. My wife has experienced so much grief. But I left them sobbing behind me, promising that I would return to them. And thankfully, I was able to maintain my promise.
In 1774, Colonel David Mason of Salem purchased 19 French cannons. He had Captain Robert Foster, a blacksmith, mount these cannons to the back of carriages. The carriages were carefully hidden about the premises of Foster's shop, waiting and ready for use against the British in the much anticipated war. The British did find out about these cannons, and on February 26, 1775, Colonel Leslie of the British Army landed at Marblehead Neck with 300 men. They marched to seize our cannon and munitions. I mustered my men, and we met to meet them. Before our arrival, the drawbridge over the North River had been drawn up. This prevented the British from crossing. After a long standoff, the British finally withdrew. If not for Colonel Leslie's retreat that day, the first shots of the war would have been heard in Salem instead of Lexington. We were making our way back to Lynn End afterwards and ran into the Reading Company. They were on their way to help. We relayed the events of the day and sent them on their way back to Reading. And what might have been the first casualty of the war, Joseph Newhall, died a few days later from a violent seizure due to an illness he caught on that march.
After that incident in Salem and the Essex Resolves, tension mounted. Everyone knew something was about to break. The differences between Crown and Colony were just getting wider and wider. Messages were relayed off into the countryside with every new development. Then came the 18th of April in 75. I'm sure every one of you remembers the story of Paul Revere, and the history buffs can add the names of William Dawes and Samuel Prescott. But right here, right in Lynn End, we had our very own Midnight Rider.
Martin Harris.
Captain.
Sir.
So as you know, I was not a member of Captain Bancroft's company here in Lynn End. I was a resident of Reading's North Parish. On April 18th, I wasn't there either. I was in Medford. I was there studying under Dr. Simon Tufts for a career in medicine. I was a little older than my fellow students, John Brooks and John Sprague, but I was just as determined. Dr. Tufts, as it happened, lived right next door to Isaac Hall, the head of the Medford Militia. Sometime in the night, a mysterious rider arrived. It was Paul Revere. He told us to ride north with word of the advance of the British troops. Sprague headed to his hometown of Malden, then I think on to Lynn's third parish, Saugus. I went to Reading to tell John Brooks, my classmate until recently. That's where he had moved to become the town doctor. When I got to, he was also elected captain of the Minute Company there. When I got to his house, I was told he was out with a patient, but I don't believe that. Brooks knew exactly what was going on. He was out making plans for battle when I found him. After I met up with him, he rode throughout Reading, gathering his men. On my way northward, I stopped to alert Stonham's Captain Samuel Sprague by the shores of Spot Pond. And of course, I came here to Lynn End to tell Captain Bancroft. With my horse panting, I rode up to Gowing's Tavern. I yelled, "Stand to your arms. The regulars are out."
Martin, in all the years I ran that tavern, seeing you ride up to the front door that day was one of the most exciting, surreal, and ominous moments.
Throughout my ride, my heart was racing so fast, I really didn't think of it as history in the making. By the way, you'll notice that many in this impromptu alarm system were doctors. Joseph Warren, John Brooks, John Sprague, myself, and Dr. Samuel Prescott, who went all the way to Concord. It's probably because, you have to remember, what we were doing could have been considered treasonous by the Crown.
Right.
But, being in the medical profession, we had cover story. We had a reason to be riding around in the middle of the night. Also, we were the ones with horses. Even Paul Revere, a silversmith, had to borrow his. Revere's still the ones we've remembered the most. I think it's because they wrote a poem about it.
Oh, yeah.
We need to do something about that.
Right now.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear the tale of that fateful night. On the 18th of April in 75, the Redcoats wanted a fight. Our hero, Martin Herrick, his studies nearly done, as word came down in Medford town, the crisis had begun. Ride, Martin, ride. You've got to warn the countryside. Our differences with England have grown far too wide. It's hard to believe, young Herrick said, they finally lit the fuse. Duty calls. I must ride home to Reading with the news. My commander must be told, he thought, as he put away his books. With lightened load and familiar road, he raced to Captain Brooks. Ride, Martin, ride. You've got to warn the countryside. The regulars are coming, was the message that he cried. The midnight rider's silhouette was seen on Spots Pond shore. Hurried hoofbeats were heard in Stoneham as the village clock struck 4. The farmers and the tradesmen, all with muskets in their hand, rallied round to resist the crown and marched to take a stand. Ride, Martin, ride. You've got to tell our side. Before this thing is over, our bonds will be untied. As Herrick rode to his hometown, his journey nearly through, the neighbors who responded had numbered quite a few. But upon arriving, he was told that Dr. Brooks was out, attending patient Hotshot, a story some folks doubt. But Herrick found his captain, who sent riders east and west. And who did he send to Rinzen? Brooks sent his very best. Ride, Martin, ride. Ride, Martin, ride. You've got to warn the countryside. Martin, ride.
Since Martin Herrick at the time was a resident of Reading's North Parish, after he gave the alarm here, he rode home so he could march with his own company off to Concord, Merriam's Corner. During the war, he was a naval surgeon, captured twice. After the Revolution, he settled down here in Lynnfield, became the country doctor and also a school teacher. He married Sally Wright of Middleton, and they raised 4 daughters. In 1820, by special request, he was the last to be interred in the old burial ground, right near the entrance. Benjamin Adams, Jr., you were the youngest member of Captain Bancroft's company. I think you were probably the first one at the tavern that early morning. Tell us what it was like to beat the drum, to call the militia together.
Well, I was only 16 years old at the time of the Battle of Menotomy, but I felt strongly about contributing in some way. I was given the job as drummer to help call the militia to arms. Of course, I feared what was about to happen, but I was also excited to be a part of our fight for independence. I didn't live far from Gowing's Tavern and arrived early after Martin Herrick brought the alarm. I beat the drum as hard as I could to help bring the members of the company. I was proud to beat the step for the men on the way to Menotomy.
Not everyone favored war with the Crown. After all, they were British subjects, and they had been for their entire lives. Later historians estimate that maybe only a third of the population actually favored independence. Another third was fiercely loyal to the king. That final third was undecided, or at least uncommitted. Benjamin, let's hear from your own family. Your father was minister of the church when it met across the street in the meeting house. Reverend Benjamin Adams.
I was one of those not in support of the war for independence. That being said, I wasn't a complete loyalist either, so I guess that means I fell into the third category of undecided. I would have preferred that we resolved our differences peacefully. Although I was opposed to the war and I made my feelings known to my family and to my friends and my neighbors, I had much respect for their opinions. I had no intention of standing in their way.
This is true. I knew my father would rather I wasn't involved, but he never tried to hold me back.
You've heard us talk about monotony. In case you don't know where that is, it was a village in West Cambridge. Today it's the town of Arlington. Not too far from here by car, but quite a hike when you're marching. Captain Bancroft, what was the march to monotony like?
Tensions were high on the march to monotony. Some men were in quiet conversation. Most were lost in their own thoughts. We were ready, but we didn't know what to expect. I myself, being one of the older men in the company, had never actually seen warfare. I struck up a conversation with one of my men, Zurabittle Hart. Hart had seen the previous battle. I asked him if he was afraid to go into this fight. He said no, but beware the flank guard. As we marched on monotony, I could see the main force of the British coming down the road, and in the fields on both sides were lined with flankers. Hart's warning struck me in that moment, but it was too late. We were already in the fray with the British soldiers and fighting off the flankers from what seemed like every direction. We lost 3 men that day. I often wonder if things would have been different had I heeded Hart's warning. Timothy Monroe, Daniel Townsend, I think we'd like to hear your stories from that day.
Okay, Daniel, we'll start with you.
Well, this is how it happened. We were standing behind the house of Jason Russell, firing our muskets at the British troops as they came down the road on their way back to Boston. Suddenly, Timothy and I found ourselves totally hemmed in by the flank guard of the army coming down through the fields behind us. We ran into the house looking for shelter. I turned and fired my musket. I shouted out, "There goes another greatcoat down."
Yeah.
But there was no place to hide in the house. We did not want to be trapped there. Bullets were pouring in the rear windows, In a desperate effort to escape, I dove out the window at the end of the house. And that is the last thing I remember.
Now, Timothy Monroe, you've got quite a story to tell.
I followed Daniel through the window and ran for my life. I ran a great distance with shots being fired at me. They had managed to hit me in my leg, but I was not hit again, despite 12 bullet holes in my clothing and my hat. Even the metal buttons off my waistcoat were all shot. As I ran past the last redcoat, as he stopped to fire at me and missed, he exclaimed, "Damn the Yankee, he is bulletproof. Let him go."
Timothy, we understand that there was also mercy and humanity on display on that violent day. You yourself comforted a mortally wounded British soldier. If you're up to it, can you tell us about that?
Aye. Despite being injured and having 24 bullet holes through my clothing, I was able to join the others as we scattered in every direction in a running battle chasing the British back to Charlestown. Late on the retreat, I came across a badly wounded British soldier. He begged me to stop and dress his wounds. I stemmed the flow of blood with my handkerchief, but the man died in my arms. Before he died, he gave me a silver buckle from his uniform. It was passed on to my family and still may be in their possession today. I finally made my way back to the Jason Russell house to find my friend Daniel shot dead where he fell after jumping through the window.
And Thomas Townsend, you had the task of bringing your own brother's body back home.
We were surprised by the flankers that day. It all became confusion, men scattered as we fought. We chased the invader back to Boston. When I returned to Monotony, to the house of Jacob Russell, I found the worst possible thing that I could. Later, as lieutenant in the company, I keenly felt the need to keep the men safe. But now, to my absolute horror, I discovered the body of my only and younger brother, Daniel, outside the Jacob Russell house, pierced by 7 shots. I had to bring him home to his family. And with the help of our friends and neighbors, we brought him home late that night on an ox cart. My heart was wrenched anew when I saw his widow, Zavia, wailing in grief, fall to her knees as she saw our burden. Zavia never would recover and died that October.
That night, that terrible night, couldn't sleep, I was so sick and blood. In the early hours of April 20th, I heard a lot of commotion on the road and confused voices of men, and I saw lanterns moving about in my yard. I was filled with dread. I knew something horrible had happened. Then I saw my brother-in-law's face, and I knew. I barely remember what happened next. I do know that the men laid Daniel's body very gently in the best room of our home. Some of our neighbors remained as the guard of honor, but I didn't know how I was going to go on living without him.
Reverend, something to add?
Despite my misgivings about the war, I most certainly presided at the funeral of Daniel Townsend over there in the meeting house. He was my parishioner. I was there for him and his family. His wife, Zavia, was heartbroken. She never recovered. 6 months later, I presided at her funeral as well. Following the death of Daniel, when he was buried, there was a gravestone erected at that site, and it reads this: "Sacred to the memory of Mr. Daniel Townsend, who was slain at the Battle of Lexington, April 19, 1775, aged 36. Lie, valiant Townsend, in the peaceful shades we trust. Immortal honors mingle with thy dust. What though thy body struggled in its gore, so did thy Savior's long before. And as he raised his own by power divine, so that same power shall quicken thine, and in eternal glory mayst thou shine."
Captain Bancroft. Daniel Townsend was not the only member of your company who was killed that day.
No, he wasn't. His neighbor, Thomas Hadley, who lived on a house overlooking what is now Pillings Pond, was one of the older men in our company, being over 50 years of age. And William Flynn, who lived in the southern part of Lynn End. Both men were killed that day. Sadly, in the confusion, Their bodies were buried with men from other companies, right there in that field, in the back of the Jason Russell house, where they lay. After some years, the bodies of these two patriots were brought to the cemetery over in Arlington, and a monument was erected in their honor.
Well, what happened to the little company? Shortly after the battle on the 19th, they went their separate ways. As it turns out, they never marched or fought together as a group again. We know that Thomas Townsend joined up with Colonel Pickering's regiment out of Salem. The rest scattered to the wind. Many of them did join other companies, other regiments. A few just went back to their lives. When the war ended, that's what they all did. Timothy Monroe lived in town to a ripe old age, telling anyone who would listen of his harrowing tales on the 19th of April. Now, there's no question that he was involved in the fighting. In fact, he was right in the thick of it. He was even wounded. But maybe, just maybe as the years went on, his stories might have changed a bit. Timothy, how many bullet holes did you say were in your coat?
About 32, give or take.
Incidentally, you can still see his house today. It's right on the banks of the Saugus River on the Wakefield line, down on Salem Street. It's part of a small office park today, but very recognizable. It's a big red colonial farmhouse with the year 1690 painted down the chimney. Daniel Mansfield continued to moderate town meetings for years, first over in Lynn, and then beginning in 1782 when we separated, right here in Lynnfield, right across the street in the meeting house. You can still see his home today as well. In fact, it also has a year painted on the chimney, 1740 in his case. It's in South Lynnfield, also on Salem Street. Joseph Gowing. Mr. Gowing returned to his life as an innkeeper, owner and operator of Gowing's Tavern. As he said, it was the heart and soul of the little community. We lost that important landmark years ago, burned down in a conspicuous fire in 1896. Captain Bancroft, Nathaniel Bancroft, the oldest member of his own company. He saw no more action during the Revolution, just that one day. His house survived for years, though. We just lost it 4 months ago. It was ripped down just this past December. It was up on Summer Street, surrounded by the Reedy Meadow Golf Course. You might remember it as the Danforth House. Farewell, Captain.
Yes, sir.
Every school child knows the rest of the story. The Royal troops were chased back to Boston that day, and the siege began. Then came Bunker Hill. The Provincial Congress of Massachusetts becomes the temporary government, effectively shoving aside any last remnants of the king's control here. General George Washington arrives, and on Cambridge Common takes command of the newly named Continental Army. The British evacuate Boston once and for all. Independence is declared. Valley Forge, Yorktown, the Treaty of Paris, and eventually a constitution. We become the nation that we are today, the United States of America. And it all started right here, right in our neighboring communities. Places such as Lexington and Concord, Lincoln, Acton and Stowe, Andover, Reading and Woburn, Salem, Danvers, Cambridge, Boston, and of course, right here in Lynnfield. Before we break, I have a couple of final announcements today. First, a big thank you to the Center Congregational Church for allowing us to use its historic chapel on Easter weekend. Reverend Adams was played by the current minister, Reverend Tom Bentley. Between Patriots Day and Easter, I just found out today's his birthday. Also, a big thank you to the Lynnfield Historical Society, guardians of our town's heritage for more than 7 decades, and together with the Revolution 250 Committee, has planned all of these events. Thanks. Thanks also to our principal playwright, Alan Foulds. As well as the cast, crew, and committee, who all have a hand in this tonight. And now I'd like to invite you all down the hall for coffee and conversation. How many chances do you have to hang out with your 250-year-old? Finally, don't forget, tomorrow morning we start up again at 11 o'clock with children's events at the library, three-cornered hat making and storytelling. Meanwhile, out on the common, we have the Patriot Gallery, stories of all 38 who marched that day. Keep an eye out for Martin Herrick riding in directly from Paul Revere to tell us that the regulars are out, the militia will be there, and there will be plenty of music. Happy Patriots Day, 250.